Welcome to Investment Moments with Momentum Investments, where we talk to investment professionals and financial experts about investments and savings. We unpack all things investments to give you insights to help you achieve your financial goals. This series is aimed at equipping you as a South African consumer and investor in understanding what is happening in the economy locally and globally and how this affects your daily cost of living and investments. Joining me for this discussion is Tshiamo Masike, economist at Momentum Investments. Tshiamo, as 2025 draws to a close, let's unpack where this leads South Africa. Economic activity has improved compared to 2024, even if growth remains far from impressive. The first half of the year was defined by easing inflation and resilience in household spending before price pressures re-accelerated, reminding us that the disinflation path is never linear. The second half of the year delivered a wave of positives, not seen in years, such as a well-received medium-term budget, a reduction in the inflation target to 3%, S&P's first credit rating upgrade for South Africa in 2 decades, and the removal from the Financial Action Task Force greylist. In short, 2025 wasn't a breakout year, but it does feel like it was a turning point year. With that said, Tshiamo, how would you describe South Africa's economic performance this year, and what did that really mean for ordinary consumers trying to stretch their budgets?
Thank you for having me, Levashni. So, I think in one word, how I would describe the economy this year is steadying. So, we had quite weak economic growth in the first quarter of 2025, so 0.1%. We saw a very positive surprise of 0.9% in the second quarter, and then that moderated to about 0.5% in the third quarter. So, on the production side, we saw that the sectors that really helped the economy grow were agriculture, trade, and the finance sector. And then on the expenditure side, we saw consumers play a very big role in boosting economic growth. And consumers were helped by a couple of factors. So low inflation over the year. We had interest rate cuts as well. Some two-pot withdrawals that still helped in the beginning of the year. So that played a role. The external environment did weigh on growth, but not to the extent that we were expecting when trade tariffs and uncertainty was quite high. So overall, yes, economy is expected with the 3 quarters that we have. We are expected to see growth of 1.2% this year, which is like more than double 0.5% of last year. But I will say for the consumers, this is really not enough to make a meaningful difference in a consumer's lives.
Let's dive into inflation, something we feel daily. What were the major drivers behind the shift in inflation through 2025, and how has it translated into everyday costs for consumers?
So as you mentioned when we started this conversation, we had 2 parts of inflation. So we had the first half of the year where inflation was coming down, and that was because transportation costs were decreasing. Then we had the second part of the year where we saw inflation increases, and that's because those transport decreases were getting slower and slower, and then we also saw transport inflation picking up. We also had in food inflation that picked up, and that then elevated inflation in the second half of the year. Now, in our inflation reports that we publish on a monthly basis, we do track petrol costs and the household basket for groceries. So in terms of a petrol cost, what we saw is that petrols were the highest in February this year. So for a person driving an average 45-liter car, they spent just over 1,000 rand to fill up their petrol tank in February. In November, that same person spent only 950 rand on a full tank. So that's a saving of about 50 rand that can go to example bread. And then we also have the Pietermaritzburg Household Affordability Index, and this has the average cost of a household basket. So this basket includes things like meat, maize, sugar, etc. In November, the average cost of a food basket was around 5,400 rand, and this was about 50 rand more than a year ago. So we did see that fuel prices were lower, but food costs were higher.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that and putting numbers to it. Moving to interest rates, the South African Reserve Bank cut interest rates 4 times in 2025, from 7.75% to 6.75%. We often hear that it provides relief to consumers, but how does this practically help a consumer?
Yes, so I think those 4 interest rate cuts that we saw from the South African Reserve Bank did help consumers this year. I mean, I will say that the impact is sometimes not immediate, and we will see further impact as we go over the year. But what we saw is that what interest rates cuts did is that they lower the costs of, also they lower the amount that you repay on debt. So things like your mortgage, your car loan, credit cards, and maybe store loans as well. So if we work on a standard example, so for example, a 1 million rand house, so that loan repayment is about 670 rand less than what it was in the start of the year. So really indebted consumers had more breathing room this year as a result of those interest rate cuts.
I really have to agree with you. I've already noticed my bond repayments taking a dive. Unemployment is one of South Africa's toughest puzzles to put together. It's like a job market with too many players and not enough spots to fill. Unemployment hit 33.2% in the second quarter of 2025 before decreasing to 31.9%, meaning we saw some gains. Overall, you spoke about economic growth being better this year. Did this translate to more people being employed this year?
So really, unemployment is a big problem in South Africa. I know that the stats say numbers in the third quarter of 2025, they show that we had 8 million people who are unemployed. That's a very big number. But you ask if that translated, if the economic growth we saw this year translated to growth, to job growth. We actually didn't. We saw a net loss of 22,800 jobs this year. So 22,800 people were without a job on a net basis this year compared to the end of last year. Now that is quite unfortunate, but I think what it does, it underpins the importance of sustained economic growth that is underpinned also by those fixed investments, so that we can get growth that does boost the economy and then boost economic growth.
Now let's talk wins. South Africa scored big wins this year, getting off the grey list, getting a credit rating upgrade, the reduction in the inflation target. What do these positives actually mean for the economy, and what consumers and businesses expect to get out of this?
So, yes, in the second half of the year, we had a lot of positive developments. What they mean for the economy is that economic growth will increase over time. So, for consumers directly, we can get a lower borrowing cost for consumers. And then for businesses, because then they are more confident in the economy, then we can get more fixed investments. We are also expecting an inflow of investments from abroad, which will also then support the rand. So overall, we are expecting lower borrowing costs, and this will also then, over time, lead to better economic growth.
Thanks for that positive note. Wrapping up, what's the consumer takeaway for 2025 and a sneak peek for 2026 for consumers out there?
So the key takeaway for consumers, I think the consumers were quite resilient in 2025. And then although even growth is not where we want to be, it is a step in the right direction. For 2026, going into 2026, for consumers, we have some positive news there. Inflation is expected to moderate, and we are also expecting interest rate cuts in 2026. Currently, we expect 225 basis point cuts over 2026. So this then will also help consumers, but we are going to see some spots of pressures. So for example, we will see medical aid inflation going up high, electricity prices also having high increases, which will add pressure to the consumers. But I think we are on the right path.
Thanks, Tshiamo, for wrapping that up in a positive note for next year. That's all the questions I have for today. Thank you for giving us a better picture of where we've been in 2025 and, importantly, what ordinary South Africans can focus on heading into the new year. Lower interest rates are putting a little more money back in our pockets each month, and those structural wins from the grey listing exit, the credit rating upgrade, and the new 3% inflation target are laying the foundation for cheaper borrowing and more sustainable growth in the years ahead. For more insights from our macro research team, visit momentum.co.za. I look forward to chatting to you again in the new year, Tshiamo.
Thank you, Levashni.
To our viewers, thank you for watching.